cover crops. Just a quick introduction of our team for those of you that don't know us. This is our overview map and also a link to our website if you guys want to check us out. Also, I wanted to just give you guys a quick introduction of some of our newest team members. All of these people have joined since we did our last Water Quality Wednesday. So we have Amber Herman, Courtney Krieger, and Jocelyn Burt. We're very thankful to have these ladies on our team. Each of them bring a unique perspective and background to our research and outreach. And just hello again, we have Rachel, Matt, and I. Most of you guys should know us, but if not, we have a little bit on what we specialize here in the boxes. So from here, I'm going to let Rachel share her screen, and she's going to talk about cover crops and water quality.
Great, thanks, Paige. Can you see everything okay?
It looks good.
Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. As Paige said, my name is Rachel Cochran. I am the Water Quality Extension Associate covering Paulding, Defiance, and Van Wert counties. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how cover crops interact with water quality for today's webinar. I know some of you on the initial poll indicated that you have advanced knowledge of cover crops, which is great. We love to see that. But this first little bit of our webinar is going to focus a little bit more on the basics. So sit back and relax and drop any questions that you have in the Q&A box. So today we're going to talk about how cover crops can be used as a tool for improving water quality. And we're going to talk about three main ways. So the first is going to be soil improvement. The second is going to be prevention of nutrient loss. And the third is going to be from a reduction in chemical input standpoint. So for soil improvement, we have three ways here: by the prevention of soil erosion, the improvement of aggregate stability in our soils, and then by alleviating compaction. And we'll go more in depth on all of these in just a few minutes. Under reduction in inputs, we're going to talk about how they can return those nutrients to the soil and possibly how they can compete with weeds. And then by preventing nutrient loss, we'll talk about how cover crops absorb excess nutrients. And we're going to look at the intersection of the three of these, and that's where cover crops fits in. So let's get into it. Three ways that cover crops can improve our soils. So first, by preventing soil erosion. It's kind of simple, but cover crops keep the soil covered. That's why they're called cover crops. So that presence of vegetation on the soil surface works in two ways. It slows down the velocity of water that's moving off of the field, and it protects that soil from raindrop impact. So you can see these two pictures I have over to the right. The top field doesn't have cover crops, and you can see that there's a little bit of erosion there from that water movement. So those cover crops in the bottom picture have slowed down the velocity of that water moving off the field, and they've held the soil in place with their roots and with their biomass. They've also worked to protect that soil from raindrop impact, which gets rid of erosion that way, and it also helps prevent against compaction. So even if that plant is winter killed, those roots are in place in the soil, and that can help to prevent erosion. And preventing those soil particles from reaching the water keeps those nutrients attached to the soil particles out of the waterways. So next, we're talking about increasing that soil's aggregate stability. So aggregate stability is the ability of that soil to stick together and to stay as one clump, essentially. So glomalin that's produced by mycorrhizal fungi that live in the roots in the soil can actually help increase aggregate stability, and it improves our soil structure. So the more food we have for that fungi in the soil in the winter time, if we have cover crops growing, there's more presence of a food source for those. So we're going to help produce that glomalin. The decomposition of cover crops increases our soil organic carbon. And our soil organic carbon is a very large factor with the organic matter amounts in our soil. So increasing the soil organic carbon increases that organic matter. Increased organic matter gives us better aggregate stability, and we increase the water holding capacity of our soil. So over to the right, the bottom picture is actually called the slake test. I know a lot of people have probably heard of this by now. but this is a popular way to demonstrate the visual aggregate stability of two soils. So soil A here, we're going to call that our cover crop soil, and soil B is going to be our bare conventionally tilled soil. So soil A may or may not be from a no-till field. It may just be from a field that utilizes cover crops or better soil promoting practices. But as you can see, soil A, when dunked in water, is holding together way better than soil B. So you can see parts of soil B at the bottom of the jar that have kind of fallen apart. So as a result of our increased aggregate stability, our nutrients are more strongly held to our soil, and those soil particles are more strongly held together. So next, we're going to talk about how compaction can be alleviated with the use of cover crops. So cover crops can have tap roots, fibrous roots, or both. Now, if we have tap roots, like in some of our radishes, those are going to penetrate deep down into the soil. We have fibrous roots, and those can work laterally and vertically through the soil. So those can both work to break up plowpan layers. They can work to improve infiltration. And because of that improved infiltration, we can decrease our runoff of our surface water and prevent losses that way. So next, prevention of nutrient loss. So those cover crops need nutrients to grow, just like every other plant that we like to have on our operations. The timing here is what benefits us. We plant these cover crops after the cash crop comes off the field, sometimes while it's still in the field, but those cover crops utilize the nutrients that are left over from the growing season. So those grass cover crops, our broadleaf cover crops, pull nitrogen and phosphorus from the soil, which could be lost during the winter. Now, notice how I didn't mention our legume cover crops, and we'll get to that in just a minute. But these grass and broadleaf cover crops benefit us in a couple of ways. We see prevention of loss by runoff of those nutrients, and we prevent the change to unusable nutrient forms. So rather than our nitrogen turning into unusable forms, we see it pulled up into the cover crop and held there over the winter. So we're going to translate that into a reduction in inputs. So the first way is competition with weeds. So a lot of our cover crops that we use in Northwest Ohio have a lot of our cover crop mixes have rye included. And rye is a very good species of cover crop to use when you have a weed problem, because it, number one, can compete for resources. So if you have rye, you've probably noticed that it grows pretty robustly. So once we terminate that rye, or once we roll that rye, you can see here in these pictures that it provides a pretty good mat, and that prevents sunlight from reaching the soil and smothers out any weed competition. In addition, rye cover crops demonstrate allelopathy, which means that they produce chemicals that essentially kill other germinating plants, so we can prevent weeds from coming up that way. Now, if we look at those two ways, we can reduce our herbicide costs and our use, and we can see a lower chance of that herbicide loss to streams or ditches, which improves water quality. Now, I mentioned before how our cover crops pull nutrients out of the soil, but they also return those nutrients to the soil. So I didn't mention our legume species when I talked about pulling nutrients out of the soil, but I'm going to talk about them now. So our legume species fix nitrogen into the soil. They take atmospheric nitrogen gas and they essentially put it into the soil for our crops to use. So this creates a little bump of nitrogen for our following cash crop. In addition, those grass and broadleaf species simply return what was already there after they start to decompose. So if you terminate the cover crop, or if it gets winter killed, that plant's going to eventually begin to decompose. And the decomposition of that plant material releases those nutrients back to the soil, and then eventually they become available to our cash crop and they get taken up that way. So we see a twofold benefit with this. Number one, we decrease that runoff of surface applied fertilizers because we don't need to use as much. And second, we decrease our fertilizer costs, which leaves more money in your pocket, and that can give more money to spend on other conservation practices that can benefit water quality. So if you want to learn more, here's a pretty simple list of cover crop resources that we're going to go through. So cover crops can be a great tool for improving that quality of the water leaving your farm. And there's tons of resources and programs to aid with adopting cover crops. I'm just going to mention a few here, but this is by no means an exhaustive list. So first, NRCS Appendix A. This is a document that NRCS has put together. It contains planting dates, rates, and information on different species for growers that are enrolled in these cost share programs. Appendix A is what these programs are based off of. So if you're enrolled in any of those programs or you're interested in enrolling in those programs, take a look at Appendix A and you'll see kind of what you'll have to conform with. The second thing, NRCS Equip Program. This is a program that offers cost share to producers to implement conservation practices, including the use of cover crops. So essentially, this program will give you cost share to cover that cost of the seed, and you'll see the benefits from those cover crops from this program. Next is ODA's H2 Ohio program. It offers cost share to producers in the Western Lake Erie Basin, and now some producers outside of the Western Lake Erie Basin who plant overwintering cover crops. So the key there is that those cannot be winter killed, but again, we see cost share for implementing cover crops. Now, Monica Jean's going to talk a little bit about this later, but the Midwest Cover Crops Council has great resources on their website, from training modules to fact sheets to their own selector tool that can be used for cover crop implementation. We have a publication from SARE titled Managing Cover Crops Profitably. This is an entire book dedicated to the use of cover crops and how to use them in a way that's going to improve the profitability on your operation. And lastly, the Blanchard River Demo Farms has a publication titled Using Cover Crops to Improve Soil and Water Quality. This is also a great resource, and the research was done right here in Northwest Ohio. So that's another positive. So I'm going to take any questions that you all might have at the very end of the webinar. I did put together an evaluation of my teaching that I'm hoping that you all will take the time to fill out. You can either scan this QR code or you can type in this link that Paige is going to drop in the chat and fill it out that way. But the responses I get for that are going to go towards me trying to improve my teaching skills. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Paige and we'll answer questions at the very end.
All right, thank you, Rachel. Just a second here. Can you see my screen back on Tim's presentation?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, now we have Tim. Tim, you can take it away whenever you're ready. Just like I said, I'll go through your next slide whenever you tell me to go.
All right. Well, thank you all for asking me. I'm from Missouri. My name's Tim Reinbott. I've been working with cover crops for a long time. We started working with them in the late 1980s when we realized that we needed some more cover on the soil, and we got a lot of pushback. I always say that we were working with cover crops before cover crops were cool. And then we got away from them. And then in the last 20 years or so, we've gotten back into cover crop, some research and demonstration. My dad, he actually just passed away at 102 here a few months ago. When I first started working with cover crops, I was telling him all the neat things we were doing. And he said, you know, we did that in the 1930s. So cover crops were not anything new, but I think with modern technology, we can really take it to the next step or two above where they were working on. So let's have the next one. All right, the first one we're talking about is slugs. And these are a couple of issues that we do have in slugs. I mean, do we have in cover crops? And I know just a few years ago in Missouri, a lot of cotton in the southeast corner of Missouri got wiped out by slugs, because we see those in the spring and also in the fall when it's wet and cool condition, and the plants are growing fairly slow and they can't outgrow any type of the damage. And what they really like is this high protein diet. Of course, we're going to get that from our seeds, That's why our legumes are often picked for those. And in the cotton that we got them just because they were in the seedling stage, and that's where they made a lot of their destruction. All right, next slide. So one of the things I gotta keep reminding myself also is that slugs are not insects. They're mollusks like a snail, except they don't have a shell. So insecticides are not going to work, and they feed a little bit differently. And on your left is what they look like feeding on corn, and on the right, soybean. Now, the nice thing about corn is, the growing point is below the ground, and they can weaken it, defoliate it pretty good, and still keep getting that plant coming back. But anything like soybean that's going to have its growing point above the ground when it emerges, we're really in some considerations there. And as you see, it's one on the right, the damage is pretty bad, and the soybean's not going to recover from that. We had some slug issues this past couple of years, and as you all know, soybeans, when they get damaged like this, yeah, they may be alive, but they're not going to function the way we want them to. So let's try to prevent this from happening. I didn't say move it yet. No, I'm ready. No, I was just joking. Don't take me too serious on that kind of thing. So let's talk about cultural management of slugs. One of the best things is really doing a good job planting your crop, and not getting that furrow closed is something that happens a lot. Now, I have been guilty of this myself. You just because you can plant doesn't mean you should be planting. And then when we do plant the cover crops, when we go into a lot of no-till, the soil is a little moisture than what we think. And we think we're closing it up good, but then we get a little sunshine and it spreads back out. And that's when the slugs can really do a lot of damage. Again, we had this same type of damage a couple of years ago here in Missouri, and it looked a lot like that. It really did. And so mechanical on your planter, there's a lot of good resources out there that how we really want to change our planter around to make sure that we're getting good seed to soil contact, but also not having this this system where the furrows will open back up. And as simple as using a spike tooth closing wheel will help you a lot on that. And we converted all of our planters to that we were doing a lot of no-till and cover crop work on. The other thing is planting your corn deep or greater than 2 inches is really important. That really sets the growing point down. So slugs can't affect it as much. And also soybean. I know one of my colleagues and I go round and around about planting depth on crops, corn and soybeans. I'm guilty of anything of socking them in the ground, because for reasons like this and other reasons, while he's more worried about good emergence or quicker emergence, I think if I can get them a little bit deeper, they may come up a day later. But if I can protect them from some of these issues like slugs, I will. And also, when you remember in cover crops, you want to plant below where some of your residue is getting pinned into the soil. You want to get below that. So that's another good reason to plant your soybeans and corn a little deeper than what you normally would. Now, I did run into something this past year when I was planting in a field that we had 11 years of cover crops. The planter actually went down a little deeper because the soil was so much looser in those cover crops. I didn't think about that. I got a little bit of a hurry and didn't check my planting depth again, which I should have. But anyway, they still came up at 3 inches, so they were doing good. One of the little nice things, though, is Rachel mentioned about radishes a while ago, or showed the illustration of radishes bringing up nutrients. radishes contain a lot of sulfur, and slugs can't digest that. So if you have radishes in your cover crop mix, you can eliminate some of your slugs that way. So keeping these cultural methods open is really good. All right, let's get the next one. And my favorite thing is planting green. And you may think, how's that going to help anything? Well, again, some of my colleagues and I go round and around about when you terminate the cover crop. I like to plant green. I don't like planting, terminating my cover crop too early. I know I've told folks, why are you spending all that money for your cover crop when you're killing it a month ahead of time? I like to get the full benefit out of that. I get it. Sometimes with corn, you want to hurry up and get it planted. I get that for the growing season. Soybeans a bit more forgiving, and that's when I think we can really shine on this by letting our cover crop get as large as possible, planting it green like you see here, and hold off on terminating it for just a little bit. Let the slugs eat the legumes. They love legumes, and let them feed on that, and then give your soybeans time to get up and they can grow through this. So that's how, or let your soybeans come up where we have a lot of green still, and then go ahead, if you need to terminate your cover crop, if it's not dead already, you can do it then. So that's, to me, that's one of the key processes. Let's go to the next one. And this just shows some data. I'd like to see data. This came from Maryland that shows that when they did delay cover crop termination, they actually got better soybean populations and, of course, yields. And also, if you have a mix of cover crops, it's really important. Not just one species. Make sure you have your radish or in there, as well as the legumes along with that cereal crop. And that's another good reason to delay your termination. All right, next, please. All right, let's switch now to vole damage. And this is a producer's field from this past year, and you can see that voles can do a lot of damage, especially in soybeans. That little critter there on your upper right, they're only about 3 to 7 inches long, little short legs, a short tail, but they can do a lot of damage fairly quickly. And with vole damage, it's one of the things, let's not get an issue, because it's easier to prevent, I believe, than we are once we get them. Once we get them like this, it starts to get kind of rough about how we're going to do this. It's going to take a lot of different mechanisms to try to do it. So let's go to the next one. So they're prairie voles, and they have underground system. They also, you see it just like this on top of the ground. I know in my place, every time I'll step into a hole or something, it's because the dogs have been trying to dig up these prairie voles or the coyotes or some of the other ones. So this is the kind of damage they do. They're very extensive damage. They also reproduce quite frequently. They can have several litters a year, and you can go from just a few to a lot very quickly. I've seen numbers 40 to 50 young per year. So as I said, preventing them is probably the best bet than trying to, once you have an issue. Let's go to the next one. They like grassy areas like waterways. And this is where we have to start balancing some of our other objectives with preventing the voles. For example, if we keep them mowed, we keep them burned, that's gonna keep the grassy areas down. They'll be subject to a lot more of the predators, so we won't have as much. But if we also are trying at the same time having these grassy areas or these mixed areas for pollinators or wildlife, that flies into the face of what we're trying to do with preventing the voles. So the compromise is let's burn them in the spring, let them do their thing as far as having overwintering habitat like now, what you wait till spring to burn them or even to mow them, but especially do this around our soybeans because they seem to be the most susceptible of it. The voles do prefer clover and hairy vetch and alfalfa. So again, they like the lagoons to root around in. They don't like canola, another brassica, like our radishes are. So again, putting some radishes in there may help keeping them out, but they really do like soybeans. And again, it's that high protein diet that they're looking for. Go to the next one. Oh, speaking of the high protein diet, when we talk about cover crops, whether to drill or to overseed, I used to do a lot of overseeding. I don't do a lot anymore because it all wound up being, if it didn't rain, it wound up being cricket food, but I think it also winds up being slug and bowl food too. So that's just my own preference, but I know we have to try and manage that. Now, all of the controls that we have are about 60% effective at best. So we've got to have a lot of things going on to try to keep them out. Predators are our friends, whether it's hawks or owls or foxes or coyotes. They can do a really good job about keeping them down. I had an example here a few years ago. We had one of our forage technicians ask me if I had a gun. I said, well, you either try to get me fired or do you have an issue? I said, well, what's your issue? He said, well, we have I'm out mowing my plots, forage plots, and a coyote is following me around. I think there's something wrong with them. And I said, I think the coyote is hunting voles and field mice. So they do a great job with that. This past year, we also had a student trying to get some horticultural crops growing, some tomatoes and kale and some others, and the rabbits kept eating all of them. And finally, one of the guys that works with us that does the trapping for us said, you know, I think I got carried away because I took out too many coyotes, because the coyotes do keep those in check. So I know a lot of folks like to go coyote hunting, at least here in Missouri. So, but you may want to back off on that just a little bit because they do provide a great service. Now, a lot of folks will say, well, if you tell, you can get rid of a lot of your issues. Let's not even consider that. That's not on the table. So forget about that. Terminate the cover crop. You can do it when it's small. I get that. If you do it when they're small, you don't have the food there, so they won't hang around. And if it's that 30 days before planting, they won't be there. So yeah, I get that. But I also want to have, like Rachel talked about, all these good reasons to have cover crops. I think we miss some of those when we do that. We miss a lot of that when we do it. Traps and baits, they are somewhat effective, but probably not the most desirable. I don't know if we want to get into that heavily, unless you just got a terrible situation. Let's go to the next one. All right, again, cover crop management. I think that's where it gets into it. This is us planting. Before we changed the spike tooth closers here a few years ago, that planting green just like this is what we like to do. You can terminate it afterwards, at the same time or afterwards. I think if you wait a little bit longer, it's going to help a lot with not only the voles, but also the slug control, and planting it deeper. And that's really important too. And I can't stress enough how to get in when you work with cover crops, spend some time, and it's going to cost a few dollars to get your planter changed over to really handle this biomass. And we found that when you plant green, you actually have better emergence than when you roll it down first. Next one, please. So let's do a little summary. Slugs and voles. If you look at them, you see some very similar conditions. Slugs like cool, wet environments that we get in the spring, and it seems like our springs are going that way more and more. We have wetter and wetter springs. We're actually, I think, have less working days now than we did 20 years ago. They love germinating seeds, very high protein. And what I failed to mention is that don't get too carried away with some of your insecticides. And you said, well, Tim, you just told me a slug is a mollusk. Yeah, but they have a lot of natural enemies with insects. And if you kill too many of those beneficials, then you start getting into slugs. And one of the things that we're looking at now is not only the pollinators and beneficials that cover crops attract, but also the refuges around the field. And this is a way that we can help control our slugs by having more insects there. That's another good reason to wait to terminate your cover crops a little bit later. Give time for the beneficial insects to get there. And control is deeper planting. That helps out a lot. Again, I said, don't get too carried away with your insecticides, with your beneficial insects. Terminating your cover crop later, like planting green, that I love, and mixing that cover crop, mixing legumes with your cereals, and putting in some brassicas in there, because that seems to repel them quite a bit. Voles are very prolific. Damage can be widespread, but they have a lot of natural enemies also. The coyotes and the hawks that can really help keep you in check before you have a problem. They live in the grass waterways. Managing those is important. You want, especially when you're around soybeans, but I think we also got to keep in mind that we want to also attract our beneficial wildlife or different pollinators. Again, so you can burn those maybe right before you plant to allow the predators to get to them. And then just like slug control, planting green and planting deeper. And if it's a quick question, I can take it next. If not, that's my email address. Don't hesitate to give me an email. I'm a lot better about replying to emails than I am phone calls or texts. So I'll just put that up there. All right, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Tim. If you can hang around, we'll have some time at the end here for some questions. I think we have some rolling in already. Next, we have Matt Burkholder. I'm going to let him go through these slides. Matt, you just let me know when you're ready for the next one.
Okay. Thank you, Paige. Hello, everyone. I'm glad to be here today. Hope you've enjoyed the previous presentations as much as I have. Like Paige said, my name is Matt Burkholder. I'm the owner of Burkholder Healthy Farms. And one of the goals on our farm is to turn dirt into healthy soil, 1 acre at a time. As a result of that, you know, we're being a good steward of the land, and we're also being a blessing to our community. Next slide, please. My great grandparents moved here in the early 1920s in Allen County, Ohio, and I am the 4th generation to care for that farm. And what's really neat, my grandma, she's 94 years old and she still owns that farm today, and she still drives down to the field when I'm working. And that's pretty neat to see her there with us. In the 1970s, my uncle purchased the farm where we are today, and they expanded their operation from there. Next slide, please. Here's a picture of my family. As you all know, especially with regenerative ag, there's some different risks and a lot of questions and just different ways of doing things. And without their support, I would be in trouble. So I really appreciate my wife Kendra and my kids Dominic and Emberly and Karsten, and they're in the tractor with me almost every time we're out. So I really appreciate their help. Next slide, please. In 2009, I began my journey with cover crops. That was quite an adventure. I planted a mixture of annual king ryegrass in the fall, and it was really dry, did not come up. And then in the spring, we got some rains and we got some warm weather, and the annual king rye came up. And I had never planted green before. I didn't know what to do. So I contacted the 2 co-ops that I bought the seed from. And, I asked them, I said, hey, how do I plant this? How do we terminate it? Both co-ops said, I don't know. And I'm like, do you have anyone you can ask? And both co-ops said the same thing again. I don't know. So we planted the soybeans. You know, it worked out okay, but the termination of the annual king ryegrass was a challenge because the annual king rye has multiple species of annual ryegrass in it, not just one. So they were all at different stages when we terminated them. So the annual rye came back and it was a pain. But we made it through that. And then I took a couple years off of cover crops. I did not plant my next cover crop until the fall of 2011. Planted cereal rye after soybeans. And then the picture below here with my tractor and drill, that was my first time, well, my second attempt at planting green. And that worked very well. Just like Tim said, in that picture right there, I planted those beans at 1.75 inches deep. You know, I really like it. I really like planting deeper also. I think it works better. You know, it takes an extra day to germinate, or I'm sorry, emerge, but I really think it works better. I am also working for the Nature Conservancy. I'm working with the Farmer Advocate Program. The Farmer Advocate Program is a free service to farmers, consulting to help farmers on a regenerative ag journey. And here's a picture of my Farmer Advocate before the Farmer Advocate Program even started. My good friend Dwight Clary, he's from over by Fall Story, Ohio. He has been a huge help to me in this journey. So the next progression in this field, in 2016, Dwight suggested that I eliminate the granular salt-based fertilizer, you know, before corn and soybeans. I still apply that fertilizer in the fall before wheat, you know, so I can get a good wheat crop in the fall and it can have the nutrients over winter. But before corn and soybeans, we've eliminated the granular salt-based fertilizer. Next slide, please. In 2018, in this field, we had a vole issue, and I think we also had some slugs. So my friend Dwight suggested that I put up some perches and make some houses for to try to attract kestrel hawk and eastern screech owl. And ever since I have put those up, I have not had a vole or slug issue since. So I really think, you know, I really think that's a good thing to do. You know, it's just scrap wood that I had around and some scrap steel. You know, I don't have much in it. And I think it is really effective. So next slide, please. Who all remembers the spring of 2019? Remember, it was very wet. We had some prevent plant, some delayed planting. On this field, I wanted to plant corn. So I started on the west side of the field. And because that's the better side of the field, I started on the west side of the field planting corn and worked my way east. I had about 7 acres left and I got rained out. We got like 2 inches of rain in an hour. I said, okay, I'm not planting any more corn this spring. That's it. So, you know, it was a couple weeks before we could get in the field again. And I thought, well, you know, that 7 acres, I would just plant it to soybeans. And I was talking to my friend Dwight again. And he said, well, he said, you know, you're always complaining about the east side of the field, how it's, you know, always less productive than the rest of the field. He said, why don't you plant a double crop cover crop? And I said, plant a what? He said, plant a double crop cover crop. He said, you're at the end of June, you know, get you a big cover crop mix, a warm season mix, and plant a cover crop. So I did. You know, we took care of the weeds first, and then I planted a big cover crop mix. It had, you know, sorghum, Sudan grass, sun hemp, buckwheat. I think there might have been some cowpeas. There was sunflowers. Just, I can't remember everything, but there was a lot. And so we let that grow. You know, it really took off and grew. We got some nice rains later on. And then early September, as you can see in the picture here, that's the residue and the biomass there. I ran that down early September with the tractor and the drill, and I planted a mixture of cereal rye, crimson clover, and radish. I planted that at 60 pounds the acre. You know, I'm running over that biomass and I'm thinking, how in the world is this going to come through here? You know, those plants are still green. Are they going to be tying up any nutrients, any moisture? Well, a couple weeks later, the cereal rye and the crimson clover start emerging through that, and it takes off and grows really well. We got the corn harvested on the other side of the field. I planted the rest of the field to cereal rye. And, the next spring we planted soybeans, and fast forward to harvest. A friend of mine that does my harvesting, he's on the east side of the field, and he calls me and he's like, "What'd you do different on the east side of the field with these soybeans?" And I said, "I didn't do anything different." I said, "It's the same soybeans, same planting depth, same nutrients, same drainage tile, same everything." And he said, "Well," he said, "the beans on this side of the field are yielding 10 bushel an acre better than the other side of the field. And this side's always worse." And I said, "Well, the double crop, cover crop, that's the only thing I did different." So we harvested those beans. I planted cereal rye. Next spring, planted soybeans again. Fast forward to harvest again. My buddy calls me again from the combine. He said, "What'd you do different to this side of the field?" I said, "Nothing." I said, "Same thing, same beans, same nutrients, same everything." So the only difference is 2 years ago, I did the double crop, cover crop. He said, "This side of the field is yielding like 12, 13 bushel an acre better than the rest of the field." And I'm thinking, sweet, finish harvest, I plant wheat. No seed treatment on the wheat. There was I put a Graph-X powder, Saber-X on the wheat. We put our nutrients on. Fast forward to last July, he's harvesting my wheat again, and he calls me. He says, "What'd you do different to this side of the field? Is it a different variety of wheat?" I said, "No, same thing. Everything is the same." And he said, "Well," he said, the wheat on the east side of the field is yielding 75 bushels the acre, which is the Allen County average. Normally, that side would be yielding like 60. We'd be 10 to 15 bushel an acre less, and it's doing 75. So I count that as a win. The double crop, cover crop really, really helped that side of the field. So in 2020, we eliminated seed treatment on soybeans and wheat. I started applying inoculant and living microbes on my soybean seed. And then, like I said, I used the Graph-X or the Saber-X powder on my seed wheat. Just a little history with soil sampling on this farm. In 2020, the grid soil test showed that the soil only needed lime and some gypsum. The nutrient levels were okay, the NPK and things like that. We just had to put on, the nutrients we did with the planter or in-season foliar applications. And then in 2020, it was obvious again, based on our soil samples, that the cover crops are making the P&K available to the cash crop. I didn't apply, any extra. This time, the grid soil test showed that only gypsum was necessary, that our pH was better. It had improved. Next slide, please. Here is a picture of our soils, and here's a picture of the neighbor's soils. Our soil is on the right. That soil has not been plowed since 2015. I have tried my best to get it cover cropped every year. You can see the radish, you can see the radish roots and the other roots there. You can see it's got, obviously there's not going to be much erosion there. It's got pretty good aggregate stability, and it's going to absorb nutrients well and have good nutrient cycling. The soil on the left, as you can see, it's like a brick. I actually, with the Farmer Advocate program, I had 3 farmers out there with me. We were digging in the soil this fall. I think that was end of October, early November. I ran across the grass lane and went into the neighbor's field and dug up a piece of soil. And that is the one that's on the left. That was chisel plowed this fall, worked down with a turbo till, I think it was, and then went through with an anhydrous applicator and put anhydrous on. You can see, like today, it's snowing and partially raining. That field's not going to absorb water nicely. There's not going to be good nutrient cycling, and they're going to have to work it again in the spring. So that was really interesting. For the farmers to break apart those clods, and 2 of those farmers told me, they're like, "You're making me feel bad." And I said, "Why is that?" And they said, "Well, I just chisel plowed quite a bit this fall, and I'm seeing that I probably shouldn't have done that. And I said, well, I'm not trying to make you feel bad. I'm just trying to teach you a different way to do things and, lower your input costs and improve your soil health. So that was pretty neat to have the farmers out there with us and to see that difference. That cover crop mix there, we did do a vertical tillage tool pass this summer because we baled the straw after wheat, and I had those strips of the chaff. And previously I've had problems with the chaff, drying out those areas the next spring when we go to plant corn. So we did hit it with a vertical tillage pass, and we seeded the cover crops at the same time. So that's the first tillage pass it's had, since 2015. Next slide, please. And here's a picture of my son back in September. He was 1 around that time, and we were just planting into a pollinator habitat. We're starting to plant some pollinator habitats, and he was just hanging out with me in the tractor and wishing he was back there. So next slide. And here's my contact info. Can call or email me. Email me might be best, but you can call or text me too. But thank you for your time, and I've enjoyed doing this presentation with you guys.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt. Next we have Monica. I think she's on. Monica.
I am. Yeah, it
Let
did
me-
work.
I'm stopping my sharing and you may share your screen now.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Monica Jean. I am a field crops educator for Michigan State University Extension, and I am in the Saginaw Bay region, which is like the central lower Michigan. Can everyone see my screen okay?
It looks good.
All right, but today I'm coming to talk to you about Midwest Cover Crop Council. I'm the Michigan chair for Midwest Cover Crop Council, and we just wanted to make sure you guys were aware of some of the tools that are available. And so I'm going to kind of highlight the Michigan ones, but the same are available in Ohio. And so if you go to your state here, each state does have their own recipes. And so here you can see with Michigan, we have several options: post corn, soybean, wheat, silage. It also gives you the resources in your state, soil health progress report, cover crop termination assistance, a lot of great information kind of surrounding getting started with cover crops and making sure that they're a success. Another awesome tool I want to mention is the selector tool we have here. And so I'm just going to go ahead and I'll select the county that I live in. Okay, and we'll just do erosion fighting. Here you can customize more, put more goals. You also can put in cash crop information and drainage information to kind of customize it more. But we'll just go with a more basic. And so what this tool does, and what my farmers always tell me they appreciate, is it gives you a visual representation of when a cover crop can be successfully established. And that's what this green bar is representing. Since we had put that we wanted help with erosion fighting, the cover crops ranked at the top here of the page. Those represent the one that are ranked the highest for their ability to help with erosion mitigation. And then of course there's some after that, as you can see. There are a couple mixtures you'll see throughout the option list that come up, but there's definitely, we have a lot more single species options just because there's more research out on single species. And there's also a simplicity to starting with a single species and getting that under control and understanding how to manage that. I'm going to go ahead and go back. Besides the selector tool and the individual recipes or resources that the state can post, there's also this field guide here that is a really great pocket guide that kind of goes through the characteristics of cover crops by species, and is a good thing just to have in your back pocket when you're walking around the fields, kind of deciding what you would like to do. And then I'm gonna real quick. There's also a YouTube page, and the YouTube page isn't new, but actively starting to collect stories of how cover crops work on farms, by the farmers telling the stories. That is new. And so there are 8 new YouTube videos posted, and they are firsthand from the farmer describing why they use the cover crops, how they use them, what they use them for. And these are newly posted, like I said, on the Midwest Cover Crop YouTube page. Now, my presentation is pretty short and sweet, and for some reason my video is being wonky today. So unfortunately, you're gonna have to see my picture here. But that's really all I have for today. So I just want to see if anybody has any questions.
Thank you, Monica. Do you have a couple minutes to stay on for questions? I know you're at a conference today.
Yes,
Okay.
I can say it.
So we'll just go ahead and go into questions for the panel. Obviously, we have Rachel, Tim, Monica, and Matt. We do have a few questions that came in through the Q&A on the webinar. The first one is asking which of the resources mentioned by Rachel would be best to detail cover crop management related to preventing the cover from being a problem in the fields. For an example, mustard becoming a weed, hairy vetch clumping together, etc. I'm not sure which of you guys want to tackle that one.
I can start and then I guess hand it off to Monica. A couple of the resources I mentioned, the SARE Managing Cover Crops Profitably does talk a little bit about potential disadvantages of cover crops. I don't think it goes too much into termination though. So there may or may not be information in there. I did do a quick search because I saw this in the Q&A and found a really great article from Iowa State. And I'll drop that link in the chat, but this talks about the considerations for, okay, you put a cover crop out, so what's your plan to terminate it? So it talks about some of the challenges with using herbicides and rolling, using tillage, things like that. And it has links to quite a few other articles on similar topics. And then the last thing I would say was I was going to mention the termination page on Midwest Cover Crops Council, but now that Monica's on, I'll throw that over to her.
Yeah, we have a really great termination bulletin too that's quite helpful at Michigan State University that I real quick had gone by. I'm not sure if there is an OSU equivalent, but I still think that it would be a really good resource even at the Michigan State one to take a look at. And those are pretty detailed as far as like mixtures, timing, rate, all of that would work best by cover crop. I also want to mention that if you are concerned about termination for whether it be weather related or field characteristics, there's also, winter kill to consider. So just depending on what you see as the problem there, Doug, there's those tools, but you can also consider using a winter kill.
This is Tim. I feel your pain on some of these becoming weeds. Where I grew up, they used hairy vetch for cotton in the 1920s. Only end source we had other than manure, and it became naturalized. It's still there. And I remember getting docked pretty heavy in wheat if we had any hairy vetch seed in it, because they do mature at the same time. And the issue is hairy vetch has lots of hard seeds in it. And I've got plots that I had hairy vetch study in 10 years ago. And I can still find hairy vetch plants out there. So there is an issue. If you're a conventional producer using herbicides, of course, with wheat now, there's lots of options for broadleaf control that helps us out a lot. When you do though get into more organic, then you do have some issues, and to the point where you may not be able to use hairy vetch in it. And also don't forget that cereal rye can be an issue too. We had that issue as a kid growing up, contaminating our wheat, and I've heard some elevators are pretty picky on that.
This is Matt. In regards to the hairy vetch, I mean, even beginning, I don't like to put over a pound of vetch in my mix before corn, just because of, you know, like you're saying, rolling or, you know, kind of dragging on the planter. I haven't had an issue yet, you know, with vetch coming back. I know it does, but I just haven't had that issue yet. But I don't like to go over a pound in a mix before corn.
But
Great.
it's our best infixer there is.
Thank you, guys. The next question is also from Doug. For slugs and moles, wouldn't a fall or spring secondary tillage tool be beneficial to disrupt their habitat and potentially allow for the incorporation of a cover crop, better seed to soil contact? If introduced at the time of tillage, seed preparation can be difficult if you don't have the correct implement or planter set up.
Yes, I don't like promoting tillage, but if you have a purpose for it and it's like a vertical tillage tool that you're still leaving a lot of residue on the ground, yes.
This is Matt. I think Jim Horman has done quite a bit of research on this also. And if I remember right, I think he might have said a tillage pass was maybe 50% effective, you know, so.
Right. None of those things are more than about 60. So yes.
Yeah. Okay.
But I think the Hawks purchase are also great.
And then we have one more in the Q&A. If you guys want to drop more questions in there, you can, or also after we get through this one, you could unmute or drop something in the chat if you have anything else. The last one is, what about crop rotation diversity with a 7 to 10 year cycle? Get away from just soybeans and corn. Does
This is
anybody
Matt.
tackle that? Go ahead.
I mean, I've been growing wheat before wheat was profitable, you know, because especially on the farms that we own, you know, you can see in my slide there with the soil difference from mine and my neighbors, you know, that getting wheat into the rotation and then getting a big cover crop mix after wheat. I also plant some earlier soybeans, you know, so I plant some 2-4 soybeans between 2-4 and 3-6, you know, so then I can get my covers out there quicker. It's just, we just make it a priority. You know, sometimes I'm planting covers at 2 a.m., just whatever it takes to get it done. So that's kind of how I do my rotation: corn, soybeans, and wheat, and then get the covers in there. So
We just got some data in of a rotation study where we go from continuous corn, soybean to 2-year, 3-year, 4-year, 5-year, and up to 4-year rotation. You can soybean yields stair step about 4 bushels each year that you add to the rotation. So it really shows up in corn also, but soybeans with all the predators that we can get sometimes, yeah, it's very important. And talked about soil health a while ago. We saw soil health ride that same curve too, soil health indicators. So we got away from long rotations, and I think our parents and grandparents were correct. We got to lengthen those out.
Well, a big thank you to all of you guys today. I hope everyone on this webinar enjoyed all of the presentations and are walking away with at least one thing new. I'm just going to put the CCA credits and CLM credits up, but we can still keep taking questions. Here really quick is the CCA QR code. You guys just scan it if you are a CCA needing credits. If you have any issues, you can drop me something in the chat, or you can email me at this email and I can make sure you get your credits. Looks like we had another question come through too. Another question is, tell us about transitioning from conventional tillage to no-till. What is the best way to avoid germination and stand issues? Add cover crop in right away.
It's of my personal opinion to tackle one or the other first. So I would definitely not recommend trying to convert to a no-till system and doing cover crops at once. I would pick one or the other, whichever one you have maybe the equipment for, the capital already purchased, right? Whatever one's more affordable and more achievable for you. I listened to a producer in my area just yesterday describe his transition over, several years and having to like buy and then phase out different forms of first tillage and then reduced tillage and then down to his no-till, right? And it was definitely a transition. And it sounds like that's what made it really successful and that's what made it stick. And so this is definitely like a long-term investment and planning. And so I would consider first just trying to do some parts of their rotation with a no-till component to it. Maybe you grow weed but then maybe you purchase some type of like light disking or lighter tillage equipment and you step down to that, right? So just think about how to make those transitions to make it more successful. It's my 2 cents.
This is Matt, and also, to get some practice with no-tilling. I mean, no-tilling wheat's easy, no-till wheat into soybeans, that's a good way to start. No-till soybeans into corn stalks, that's a good way to start. And then I seen that you had on the Midwest cover crop, the mixture of oats and radish. If you've never planted into a cover crop before, don't do like I did, and plant into, the annual king ryegrass. Oats and radish is an easy way to start. You're going to see some growth in the fall, and then by spring, you're not going to have much there, and it's going to be good practice, to get started. And if you're in Ohio, like I said, I'm part of the Farmer Advocate Program. We'd be glad to help you or find another advocate that's in your area. We'd be glad to walk you through that and with some equipment questions, and we can come out and look at your field and talk you through that. So those are just a few things.
I agree with all that. Is the worst thing you can do is get in too deep and make some terrible mistakes.
Thank you, guys. I'm going to ask one question too, but I want to throw up the CLM credit slide and poll. So if you all are a CLM and you need credits, I'm going to launch a poll asking if you are a CLM or not. Please make sure that you answer this question. I guess we have the CCA on here too, so you can answer it. But if you got the QR code, you should be good to go. Just make sure you answer yes if you are a CLM and need those credits. So I guess just for all of you all on the panel, the reason why we did this webinar was to kind of give users and whoever joins the webinar, but also with the recording, we work with a lot of producers who have either grown cover crops and had a lot of issues and they feel like they don't have enough resources or education, or they don't really want to get into it because they're afraid of what type of losses they'll have or what type of struggles they'll have. So I just kind of wanted to ask you all like a broad question. If you have any, like, I know Matt has provided a lot, but if you can provide more, just some things like how you got started and how you've continued down this path, because I think some people get discouraged after a season or two of having some sort of issue, and how did you stick with it? And for you all that have research-based knowledge, what do you guys see that you think you could give users just some sort of advice?
Paige, would you like me to go first?
Sure. Whoever
Okay.
wants to. I don't think anybody wants to give
I didn't
advice
know.
today. That's okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, like I said, when I started this, I was on my own, but I was doing rotational tillage, and honestly, I was getting bored with that. We would till the soil in the fall. I would watch erosion, watch brown snow, and then till twice in the spring. And it was just, I had one field in particular that has no drainage tile. It still doesn't have any drainage tile. We don't own the farm, but it had 3 wet holes in, and you go and you pick the planter up because the rest of the field's ready, but not those wet holes. So you pick the planter up, you plant around that. And I thought, man, there's got to be a better way to do this. Instead of tilling that up, why don't I just start no-tilling and cover cropping? And after about 4 or 5 years, those wet holes started to shrink, and now we're into 10 years in and those wet holes are gone, and that field has no drainage tile, so I would encourage anyone that's just getting started in this, take one field and stick with it. Don't no-till and cover crop it for 2 years, 3 years and say, oh, it's not working. Just stick with one field, start small. Like Tim said, and I know from experience, I call them my college degrees. Boy, I have had some college degrees and mistakes where it has cost me financially, so take it small, contact any of us with questions. But I was just determined, I thought I was seeing my organic matter levels decreasing. And I was determined. I thought, man, I want to give my kids an asset. I don't want to give them something that's down to 2% organic matter level by the time I'm done. I want it to be higher than that, so that was my determination. I just want to make sure I give my kids something when I'm done and, be a good steward to the land instead of having brown every time we see a rain, brown in the streams. Let's have some clean water. So that was my determination.
Paige, you were muted, but I'm assuming you'd like one of us to
yep.
talk.
Yeah, I was just asking if anyone else had advice, like Matt or anything else for those starting out or trying again.
Well, a farmer's advice is probably the best advice, so I don't want to I guess I could just add to maybe find some people that because there's a lot of giants out there, whether you go to the no-till conference or the conservation tillage conference OSU has or whatnot, but there's a lot of people out there now doing this that you even watch YouTube videos, try to find some type of just a support system around it too, so that you do have somebody to call upon when you kind of get into a rough place, whether that's us or if you've got some farmers in the area that you are currently working with. So I would just add that use the tools you can find. The Midwest Cover Crop Tools a great place, but there's other ones out there, and call in the people that you can work with to kind of talk through these things and help you out.
Great, thank you. If Tim or Rachel has anything, if not, we can wrap things up unless anyone else has questions.
No, I think Matt summarized it fantastic.
I've got
Great.
one more thing.
Yep.
I'm not going to name any names, but when you're getting into regenerative ag, do not contact your co-op. I would say 9 out of 10 co-ops that I have talked to are dead set against this. And I'm not being prideful, but they do not know that they don't have the knowledge or the resources. My co-op thought I was crazy the first time I did this, and another co-op I had to leave because I just got sick of the whining and complaining, every time I wanted to do something different. So I would encourage, don't contact your co-op with this. Most of them do not. They're just not educated with that. And the nice thing about the regenerative ag farmers, we're happy to share the mistakes that we made, and we want to prevent someone else from making the mistakes we made. If you go, some of the other people that you talk to, it's kind of all hush hush. We don't want them to know our yields. We don't want, because the neighbor might get a leg up on us or something. With a lot of the regenerative ag farmers I'm running into, we're glad, to help out any way we can, glad to share information and share our college degrees that were so costly. So
That's wonderful. Thank you guys for all of your presentations and all of your advice that you've given. Just for everyone in the audience, we'll send out a follow-up email with everyone's email address on there in case you want to reach out to any of the presenters separately. And then you also will get a follow-up survey when you close out of this webinar. That's just kind of some follow-up questions that we use for teaching tools for our team. But with that, I think we're good to go. I hope everyone stays safe and stays warm if you got snow. And thank you guys for joining us today.
Thank you all for asking me.
Thank you, everyone.